Chapter 1. Early Life and Education. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in the small town of Ajaccio on the island of Corsica. His family belonged to Corsican nobility, but they were not wealthy. Napoleon had 3 brothers and 5 sisters. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer, while his mother, Letizia Ramolino, was a strong-willed woman who took care of the family. Napoleon's childhood was ordinary, but he showed great interest in learning. He attended a local school where he learned about history, geography, and math. Even as a child, Napoleon loved reading about famous leaders and their military campaigns. This early interest in military history would shape his future career. In 1778, when Napoleon was just 9 years old, his father sent him to a military school in mainland France. This was a big change for young Napoleon, as he had to leave his family and adapt to a new culture and language. Despite the challenges, he was determined to succeed and become a great soldier. In 1779, after a year at the Autun Royal Military School, Napoleon enrolled in the prestigious Brienne Military School in France. The school was known for its strict discipline and rigorous training, which aimed to prepare young boys for a career in the military. Napoleon was a dedicated student, working hard to excel in his studies. He focused on subjects like mathematics, history, and science, which would later prove useful in his military career. However, life at the school was not easy for him. He struggled to fit in, as he was often teased by his classmates for his Corsican accent and modest background. Despite the challenges, Napoleon's ambition and determination kept him going. He was passionate about the military and spent much of his free time reading about famous generals and their tactics. He also participated in various military exercises and drills, demonstrating his natural leadership skills. In 1784, at the age of 15, Napoleon earned a scholarship to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris. This was an incredible opportunity, as it was one of the best military schools in France. He continued to study subjects like artillery, military strategy, and engineering, which would later become essential in his career. Napoleon's time at the École Militaire was cut short when his father passed away in 1785, leaving the family in financial trouble. As a result, Napoleon was forced to complete his studies quickly and join the army to support his family. At the age of 16, he became a second lieutenant in the French artillery, marking the beginning of his military career. Through his education and early experiences, Napoleon had built a strong foundation in military knowledge and leadership. These skills would serve him well as he embarked on a path that would lead him to become one of history's most influential military leaders. From a young age, Napoleon's ambitions went beyond his humble origins. He dreamed of making a significant impact in the world and becoming a powerful leader. This determination to succeed would shape his personal relationships and drive him forward in his military and political career. During his early years in the military, Napoleon forged strong connections with fellow soldiers and officers. He was known for his charisma, intelligence, and ability to inspire loyalty. However, he was also considered arrogant and distant by some, as he was focused on achieving greatness and did not easily form close friendships. Napoleon's love life was also marked by his ambition. In 1795, he met Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow with 2 children from a previous marriage. Josephine was a well-connected socialite in Paris, and her influence helped Napoleon advance in his career. The couple fell in love and married in 1796, but their relationship was often troubled by jealousy, infidelity, and the demands of Napoleon's military campaigns. Despite these challenges, Napoleon's ambition remained undiminished. He saw himself as a man of destiny, driven to achieve greatness for himself and his country. This conviction fueled his desire to rise through the ranks of the French military and establish himself as a leader in the political arena. As he continued to build his reputation and connections, Napoleon would eventually gain the opportunity to seize power and reshape the course of history. His early life, education, and relationships laid the groundwork for the remarkable achievements that would come to define his legacy. Chapter 2. Rise to Power. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was a period of radical social and political change in France. The revolutionaries sought to overthrow the monarchy and establish a more just and democratic society. This turbulent time provided Napoleon with the perfect opportunity to advance his career and showcase his skills as a military leader. As the revolution gained momentum, the French army faced numerous challenges, including internal divisions and conflicts with other European countries. Napoleon, now a captain, was stationed in southern France, where he took part in the siege of Toulon in 1793. This port city had been taken over by royalist forces, who were supported by a British naval fleet. Napoleon's brilliant strategies and his effective use of artillery played a crucial role in retaking Toulon, leading to a significant French victory. Napoleon's success in Toulon caught the attention of the French government, and he was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 24. This rapid rise in rank was a testament to his exceptional abilities and ambition. The French Revolution also created political instability, with various factions vying for power. In 1795, a royalist uprising threatened the new government, and Napoleon was called upon to defend the capital. With a small group of soldiers, he swiftly crushed the rebellion using a whiff of grape shot, a tactic involving concentrated artillery fire. This decisive action earned him further recognition and the gratitude of the government. In the years following the French Revolution, Napoleon continued to make a name for himself through his military prowess and strategic brilliance. His victories on the battlefield and his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of revolutionary France set the stage for his ascent to power. As he gained influence and respect, Napoleon's ambitions would soon lead him to seize the highest office in the land, forever changing the course of French history. While Napoleon's military successes played a significant role in his rise to power, his skillful political maneuvering was equally important. During the turbulent years following the French Revolution, he carefully navigated the complex political landscape, aligning himself with the right factions and seizing opportunities to further his career. In 1796, Napoleon was appointed as the commander of the French army in Italy. This position not only allowed him to showcase his military genius, but also gave him the chance to build political alliances. He skillfully negotiated treaties and formed alliances with various Italian states, which helped to secure France's position in the region. Napoleon's fame and influence grew rapidly as he led the French army to a series of victories in Italy. His successes on the battlefield translated into political power, as he became increasingly involved in the governance of the territories he conquered. He implemented reforms in administration, education, and taxation, demonstrating his ability to govern effectively. Back in France, the government was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and power struggles. The Directory, a 5-member committee that ruled France from 1795 to 1799, was deeply unpopular and unable to maintain stability. Recognizing the opportunity to strengthen his own position, Napoleon allied himself with key political figures who shared his vision for a more efficient and centralized government. In 1799, Napoleon took part in the coup of 18 Brumaire, a plot to overthrow the Directory and establish a new government led by 3 consuls. The coup was successful, and Napoleon was named first consul, granting him significant power and control over the French government. Through strategic alliances and political maneuvering, he had successfully risen to the highest office in the land. As first consul, Napoleon implemented a series of reforms aimed at improving the efficiency and stability of the French government. He restructured the legal system, established a national bank, and reorganized the education system. These reforms not only consolidated his power, but also earned him the support of the French people, who saw him as a strong and capable leader. Napoleon's political maneuvering, combined with his military successes, paved the way for his eventual ascent to the position of emperor. By skillfully navigating the complex world of revolutionary politics, he had secured his place as one of history's most influential leaders. As first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte held significant power over the French government. His primary objective was to restore stability to the country after the chaos of the French Revolution. With his keen political instincts and strong leadership skills, he embarked on a series of reforms that would shape France for years to come. One of Napoleon's first tasks as first consul was to establish a new constitution. The Constitution of the year WooEnglish, adopted in 1799, granted him executive power and the authority to appoint ministers, generals, and other high-ranking officials. This centralized system of government allowed him to maintain control over both domestic and foreign affairs. Napoleon focused on improving the economy, which had suffered greatly during the Revolution. He introduced a new currency called the franc, which helped stabilize the economy and facilitated trade. He also established the Bank of France, which centralized financial control and provided loans to businesses and the government. To address the widespread corruption and inefficiency within the French government, Napoleon reformed the civil service. He introduced a merit-based system, where officials were appointed based on their qualifications and performance, rather than their connections. This reform created a more efficient and effective administration, which helped to strengthen the French state. Napoleon also recognized the importance of law and order in maintaining stability. He commissioned a group of legal experts to create a new civil code, which would later become known as the Napoleonic Code. This comprehensive set of laws simplified and modernized the French legal system, ensuring equal treatment under the law for all citizens. During his tenure as first consul, Napoleon continued to expand France's territories through military conquests. He secured peace with Austria in the Treaty of Lunéville in 1801 and negotiated the Concordat of 1801 with Pope Pius XII, which resolved the long-standing conflict between the French government and the Catholic Church. In 1802, Napoleon's position as first consul was further solidified when a new constitution extended his term indefinitely. By 1804, his power and influence were so great that he was able to proclaim himself Emperor of the French, marking the beginning of the First French Empire. Napoleon's time as first consul laid the groundwork for his future reign as emperor. Through his ambitious reforms and relentless pursuit of power, he transformed France into a strong and stable nation that would soon dominate much of Europe. Chapter 3. Conquests and Expansion. The Italian campaign, which took place between 1796 and 1797, was one of Napoleon Bonaparte's first major military endeavours as a commander. It showcased his tactical brilliance and ability to inspire his troops, resulting in a series of impressive victories against the Austrian and Italian forces. At the start of the Italian campaign, the French army was under-equipped and demoralized. However, Napoleon's charisma and leadership quickly boosted the soldiers' morale. He inspired them with speeches and promises of wealth and glory, igniting their fighting spirit. Napoleon's strategy during the Italian campaign was to divide and conquer the enemy forces. He skillfully exploited the weaknesses of the Austrian and Italian armies by moving quickly and striking at their most vulnerable points. This approach allowed him to win a series of decisive battles, including the battles of Montenotte, Lodi, and Castiglione. One of the most significant battles of the Italian campaign was the Battle of Arcole in November 1796. Napoleon's forces faced a larger Austrian army led by General Joseph Alvinci. Despite the odds, the French army emerged victorious, largely due to Napoleon's daring tactics and ability to inspire his troops in the heat of battle. This victory further cemented his reputation as a brilliant military leader. As the French army advanced through Italy, Napoleon sought to win the support of the local population. He presented himself as a liberator, freeing the Italian people from the oppressive rule of the Austrian Empire. He established new republics in the conquered territories and implemented reforms that promoted education, infrastructure, and equality. The Italian campaign concluded with the Treaty of Campo Formio in October 1797. This peace agreement marked a major victory for France, as it forced Austria to cede control of much of northern Italy. Additionally, the French Republic secured valuable territories and resources, further strengthening its position in Europe. Napoleon's successes in the Italian campaign earned him widespread admiration and respect, both in France and across Europe. His innovative tactics, bold leadership, and ability to inspire his troops would continue to serve him well in future campaigns, as he sought to expand his empire and solidify his position as one of history's greatest military commanders. Part 2. The Egyptian Expedition. In 1798, Napoleon embarked on the Egyptian expedition, an ambitious military and scientific campaign aimed at undermining British influence in the region and establishing a French presence in Egypt. Although the expedition faced numerous challenges, it remains an important episode in Napoleon's career, as well as a significant event in the history of Egypt. The French fleet, consisting of more than 300 ships and 40,000 soldiers, set sail for Egypt in May 1798. In addition to the military force, Napoleon brought along a group of scholars, scientists, and artists to study the culture, history, and natural resources of the region. This aspect of the expedition highlights Napoleon's interest in not only military conquest, but also in the advancement of knowledge. Upon arrival in Egypt, Napoleon's forces quickly captured the city of Alexandria. They then marched towards Cairo, facing their first major challenge at the Battle of the Pyramids in July 1798. Despite being outnumbered, the French army managed to defeat the defending Egyptian Mamluk forces, thanks to Napoleon's innovative tactics and effective use of infantry squares. However, the French victory was soon overshadowed by the British Royal Navy's destruction of the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, also known as the Battle of Aboukir Bay, in August 1798. Led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, the British fleet decimated the French ships, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and stranding his army in Egypt. Despite this setback, Napoleon continued his campaign in Egypt, occupying Cairo and attempting to modernize the country's infrastructure and administration. He introduced new laws, established a modern printing press, and encouraged scientific research. These efforts, however, were met with mixed success, as the French forces struggled with supply shortages and resistance from the local population. In 1799, Napoleon launched an unsuccessful invasion of Ottoman-controlled Syria, which further weakened his position in Egypt. Facing mounting pressure from both local resistance and the British forces, Napoleon decided to return to France, leaving his troops behind under the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber. Although the Egyptian expedition ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives, it left a lasting impact on Egypt and the wider region. The scientific discoveries made by the French scholars contributed to the growing field of Egyptology and sparked a renewed interest in ancient Egyptian culture in Europe. Additionally, the expedition's legacy would play a role in shaping Egypt's future as it sought to modernize and adapt to the changing political landscape of the 19th century. The Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815, were a series of conflicts that pitted the French Empire, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, against a shifting coalition of European powers. These wars marked a period of unprecedented violence and upheaval, as well as significant territorial expansion for France. Napoleon's military genius and the innovative tactics he employed during these campaigns would reshape the nature of warfare and leave a lasting impact on European history. The War of the Third Coalition, 1803 to 1806. The first major conflict of the Napoleonic Wars was the War of the Third Coalition, which saw Napoleon facing off against an alliance of Austria, Russia, and Britain. One of the most famous battles of this war was the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. This stunning French victory against the combined forces of Austria and Russia showcased Napoleon's tactical brilliance and earned him a reputation as one of the greatest military commanders in history. The War of the Fourth Coalition, 1806 to 1807. Undeterred by the defeat of the Third Coalition, a new alliance formed against France, including Prussia, Russia, and Britain. During this war, Napoleon achieved a series of victories, such as the battles of Jena Auerstedt and Eylau, which further expanded French influence in Europe. The war concluded with the treaties of Tilsit in 1807, which forced Prussia and Russia to become French allies. The Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814. In 1808, Napoleon invaded Spain in an attempt to enforce the continental system, a blockade aimed at weakening Britain's economy. However, the French forces faced fierce resistance from the Spanish population, as well as a British army led by Sir Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington. The Peninsular War would become a long and costly struggle for Napoleon, ultimately weakening his empire and undermining his authority. The War of the Fifth Coalition, 1809. Austria, seeking to regain lost territories, once again declared war on France in 1809. Despite initial setbacks, Napoleon managed to defeat the Austrian forces at the Battle of Wagram, forcing them to sign the Treaty of Schönbrunn. This marked the end of the War of the Fifth Coalition and further expanded French territory. The invasion of Russia, 1812. In 1812, Napoleon launched a disastrous invasion of Russia, which would prove to be a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. The harsh winter, logistical challenges, and fierce Russian resistance led to the decimation of the Grande Armée, forcing Napoleon to retreat and marking the beginning of the decline of his empire. The War of the Sixth Coalition, 1812 to 1814, and the 100 Days, 1815. Following the failure of the Russian campaign, a new coalition formed against Napoleon, ultimately leading to his abdication and exile to the island of Elba in 1814. However, Napoleon escaped from exile in 1815 and returned to France, where he briefly regained power during the 100 Days. His final defeat came at the Battle of Waterloo, where the combined forces of the Seventh Coalition, led by the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, forced Napoleon to abdicate once again. He was then exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he would spend the remainder of his life. The Napoleonic Wars left a profound impact on Europe and the world, shaping the political and cultural landscape for decades to come. Napoleon's military innovations and tactical genius would influence warfare for generations. Chapter 4: The Emperor and Reforms. In 1804, following a period of significant military successes and political consolidation, Napoleon Bonaparte made the decision to transition from First Consul to Emperor of the French. This transformation marked the beginning of a new era for both Napoleon and France, with the First French Empire ushering in a period of ambitious reforms and vast territorial expansion. The coronation ceremony took place on December 2, 1804, at the historic Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The event was a grand affair, carefully planned and orchestrated to emphasize the significance of Napoleon's new position and to legitimize his rule. The ceremony was attended by numerous dignitaries, including Pope Pius XII, who had been invited to preside over the event, signaling a reconciliation between France and the Catholic Church. However, in a break from tradition and a symbol of his determination to assert his own authority, Napoleon famously crowned himself during the ceremony. As he placed the crown on his head, he sent a clear message that his power was derived from his own achievements and the will of the French people, rather than from divine right or the approval of the Church. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, was also crowned empress during the ceremony, further solidifying the imperial status of the Bonaparte family. The couple's coronation marked a significant moment in French history, as it signaled the end of the revolutionary period and the establishment of a new imperial order. Following the coronation, Napoleon embarked on a series of wide-ranging reforms aimed at modernizing and strengthening the French state. These reforms would impact various aspects of French society, including the legal system, education, infrastructure, and the economy. As emperor, Napoleon's authority and influence would grow considerably, allowing him to implement these ambitious changes and further consolidate his power. The coronation of Napoleon as Emperor of the French was a pivotal moment in his career and in the history of France. It represented the culmination of his rise to power and marked the beginning of a new chapter in the nation's history. Under Napoleon's rule, France would experience significant changes and achieve unprecedented levels of power and influence, shaping the course of European history for years to come. One of Napoleon Bonaparte's most enduring and significant achievements as Emperor of the French was the establishment of the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive set of laws that sought to reform and modernize the French legal system. Officially known as the Civil Code of the French, it was adopted in 1804 and would go on to influence legal systems across Europe and around the world. Prior to the introduction of the Napoleonic Code, France's legal system was a complex and confusing patchwork of feudal laws, royal edicts, and local customs. This lack of uniformity made the administration of justice difficult and often led to unequal treatment of citizens. Recognizing the need for a standardized and rational legal system, Napoleon commissioned a group of legal experts to draft a new civil code. The Napoleonic Code was designed to be clear, concise, and accessible to all citizens. It was based on the principles of the French Revolution, promoting equality before the law, individual rights, and the protection of private property. The code covered a wide range of legal matters, including civil rights, contracts, family law, and property rights. Some of the key provisions of the Napoleonic Code included the abolition of feudal privileges and the establishment of equal rights for all citizens, regardless of their social status or background. The guarantee of individual property rights, ensuring that citizens had the right to own, buy and sell property without interference from the state or other individuals. The introduction of a standardized system of contracts, which facilitated commerce and trade by providing clear guidelines for commercial transactions. The simplification of family law, which included reforms to marriage, divorce, and inheritance laws. These changes aimed to make family law more equitable and to protect the rights of women and children. While the Napoleonic Code was a significant step forward in terms of legal reform, it was not without its flaws. For example, women's rights were limited in certain areas, such as the ability to enter into contracts or initiate divorce proceedings without their husband's consent. Nevertheless, the Code represented a major milestone in the development of modern legal systems and set the foundation for future reforms. The impact of the Napoleonic Code extended far beyond the borders of France. As Napoleon's empire expanded, the Code was implemented in conquered territories and influenced the development of legal systems in countries such as Spain, Italy, and Germany. Even after the fall of Napoleon, the principles of the Napoleonic Code continued to shape legal systems around the world, leaving a lasting legacy of legal reform and modernization. At the height of his power, Napoleon Bonaparte presided over an empire that spanned much of Europe and influenced nations across the world. This period, often referred to as the Empire at its peak, was characterized by impressive military conquests, territorial expansion, and wide-ranging reforms that aimed to modernize and unify the French state. Napoleon's military successes, combined with his strategic alliances and diplomatic maneuvering, allowed him to establish a vast empire that included not only France, but also many other European territories. By the early 19th century, the French Empire consisted of a complex network of satellite states, client kingdoms, and annexed territories, stretching from Spain to the borders of Russia. This expansion brought new resources, wealth, and prestige to France, as well as a sense of national pride and unity. To govern this vast empire, Napoleon implemented a series of administrative reforms that aimed to centralize and standardize the various territories under his rule. These reforms included the establishment of a uniform system of laws, the Napoleonic Code, which provided a clear and consistent legal framework for the empire. He also reorganized the administrative divisions of France and its territories, creating a more efficient and centralized bureaucracy. In addition to his legal and administrative reforms, Napoleon undertook a series of ambitious infrastructure projects aimed at modernizing the French economy and improving the lives of its citizens. These projects included the construction of new roads, bridges, and canals, as well as the improvement of existing infrastructure. These investments in infrastructure not only facilitated trade and communication within the empire, but also contributed to the growth of the French economy and the well-being of its people. Napoleon's empire also experienced a flourishing of culture and the arts, as the emperor sought to promote French culture and values across his territories. He encouraged the development of new artistic and intellectual movements and provided patronage to leading artists, writers, and scientists. This cultural expansion helped to solidify France's status as a leading power in Europe and to spread its influence across the continent. However, the empire at its peak was not without its challenges. The vast territories under Napoleon's control were difficult to govern and maintain, as they faced resistance from local populations and the constant threat of invasion from rival powers. These challenges, combined with the strains of the ongoing Napoleonic Wars, would eventually contribute to the decline and eventual fall of the French Empire. Despite these challenges, the period of the empire at its peak represents an important chapter in the history of France and Europe. Napoleon's ambitious reforms and military successes helped to reshape the continent, leaving a lasting impact on its political, cultural, and economic landscape. Chapter 5: Downfall and Exile. The downfall of Napoleon Bonaparte and his empire can be traced back to several pivotal events and decisions, but one of the most significant was the disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. This military campaign not only marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon's rule, but also led to his eventual exile and the collapse of the French Empire. The decision to invade Russia was fueled by a combination of factors, including Napoleon's desire to expand his empire, secure his eastern borders, and enforce the continental system, a trade embargo against Britain. However, despite his initial confidence in the success of the campaign, the invasion proved to be a catastrophic failure, with disastrous consequences for both Napoleon and his empire. The invasion of Russia began in June 1812, with a force of more than 600,000 soldiers from various countries under Napoleon's control. The initial stages of the campaign were marked by a series of victories, as the French forces pushed deeper into Russian territory. However, these successes were soon overshadowed by the numerous challenges and difficulties that the Grande Armée faced during the invasion. One of the most significant challenges was the logistical nightmare of supplying such a vast army over long distances and through hostile territory. As the French forces advanced further into Russia, their supply lines became increasingly stretched, leaving the soldiers hungry, exhausted, and demoralized. Another major obstacle was the Russian strategy of retreating and employing scorched earth tactics, which involved destroying crops, infrastructure, and anything else that could be of use to the invading forces. This strategy not only hindered the French advance, but also further strained their already limited resources. The turning point of the campaign came in September 1812, when the French army reached Moscow, expecting the city's surrender. Instead, they found the city abandoned and set ablaze, leaving them without the supplies and shelter they desperately needed. With winter approaching, and his army's situation becoming increasingly dire, Napoleon made the difficult decision to retreat from Moscow in October 1812. The retreat from Moscow proved to be even more disastrous than the invasion itself, as the French forces faced a brutal Russian winter, starvation, disease, and constant attacks from Russian forces. By the time the remnants of the Grande Armée reached the safety of French territory in December 1812, it had been reduced to a fraction of its original size, with an estimated 400,000 soldiers dead or captured. The failure of the Russian campaign was a major blow to Napoleon's prestige and authority, as well as to the stability of his empire. The weakened state of the French military left the empire vulnerable to attack, and the costly campaign had strained the resources and morale of the French people. In the years that followed, a series of military defeats and political setbacks would ultimately lead to Napoleon's abdication and exile, marking the end of an era in European history. The disastrous invasion of Russia marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon Bonaparte. But it was the War of the Sixth Coalition that would ultimately lead to his first exile and the collapse of the French Empire. The coalition, made up of several European powers including Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain, aimed to put an end to Napoleon's rule and restore the balance of power in Europe. In the aftermath of the Russian campaign, the French military was severely weakened, and many of Napoleon's former allies began to question his leadership. Sensing an opportunity, the nations of the Sixth Coalition launched a series of military campaigns against the French Empire, with the goal of removing Napoleon from power and restoring the pre-Napoleonic order. The war began in earnest in 1813, with a series of battles between the coalition forces and the French army. Although Napoleon was able to achieve some initial victories, the tide soon turned against him, as the coalition forces continued to grow in strength and numbers. By 1814, the French military was in full retreat, with the coalition forces closing in on Paris. Facing mounting pressure from both his enemies and his own people, Napoleon made the difficult decision to abdicate the throne on April 6, 1814. He was subsequently exiled to the island of Elba, located off the coast of Italy, where he was granted sovereignty over the island and a small army to maintain order. During his time on Elba, Napoleon remained active and involved in the governance of the island, implementing a series of reforms aimed at improving the lives of the island's inhabitants. However, he also kept a close eye on the events unfolding in France and Europe, as the coalition struggled to maintain stability and order in the aftermath of his abdication. Napoleon's first exile would be short-lived, as he managed to escape Elba in February 1815 and returned to France. The period that followed, known as the 100 Days, would see Napoleon regain power, only to be defeated once again by the forces of the Seventh Coalition at the Battle of Waterloo. This defeat would lead to his final exile on the remote island of St. Helena, where he would live out the remainder of his days until his death in 1821. The War of the Sixth Coalition and the first exile of Napoleon Bonaparte marked a turning point in European history as the continent began to emerge from the chaos and upheaval of the Napoleonic Wars. The fall of Napoleon and the collapse of the French Empire set the stage for a new era of diplomacy and cooperation, as the nations of Europe sought to rebuild and redefine themselves in the aftermath of the conflict. The 100 Days, a brief period in 1815 when Napoleon Bonaparte returned to power after escaping from his first exile on the island of Elba, represented a final attempt by the former emperor to regain control of France and restore his empire. However, this dramatic episode would ultimately end in failure, leading to Napoleon's final exile on the remote island of St. Helena. Following his escape from Elba, Napoleon landed in France in March 1815 and quickly gained the support of the French people and military. As he made his way towards Paris, the reigning monarch, King Louis XVI, fled the city, and Napoleon re-entered the capital unopposed. With the French government once again under his control, Napoleon set about preparing for the inevitable conflict with the European powers that had exiled him. During the 100 Days, Napoleon attempted to rally support and rebuild his military, while also implementing a series of reforms aimed at addressing the grievances of the French people. However, his return to power was met with alarm and hostility by the other European nations, who quickly formed the Seventh Coalition in an effort to defeat him once and for all. The decisive battle of this conflict would take place at Waterloo, in present-day Belgium, on June 18, 1815. Napoleon's forces faced off against an Allied army led by the British Duke of Wellington and the Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard Lebrecht von Blücher. Despite a hard-fought battle, the French forces were ultimately defeated, marking the end of Napoleon's rule and the collapse of the French Empire. Following his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon attempted to flee to the United States, but was eventually captured by the British Navy. He was then exiled for a second time, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean, where he would spend the remainder of his life. Napoleon's final exile on St. Helena was marked by isolation and declining health. He was confined to a small residence known as Longwood House and closely monitored by British authorities, who were determined to prevent any further attempts at escape or a return to power. Despite these restrictions, Napoleon remained active and engaged, writing his memoirs and reflecting on his life and legacy. Napoleon Bonaparte died on St. Helena on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. His death marked the end of a tumultuous and transformative period in European history, as well as the life of one of the most influential and controversial figures of his time. Although his empire had crumbled and his dreams of conquest had been dashed, Napoleon's impact on Europe and the world would endure long after his death, shaping the course of history for generations to come. Chapter 6: Final Days and Legacy. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, was the climactic and decisive engagement between Napoleon Bonaparte's French forces and the armies of the Seventh Coalition, led by the Duke of Wellington and Field Marshal von Blücher. This battle not only marked the end of Napoleon's 100 days and his final bid for power, but also had lasting consequences for European politics and the course of history. In the lead-up to the battle, both sides knew that the outcome would have far-reaching implications for the future of Europe. Napoleon had recently escaped from his first exile on Elba and managed to regain control of the French government, much to the alarm of the other European powers. The Seventh Coalition, comprising several nations including Britain, Prussia, Austria and Russia, had formed to counter Napoleon's return and restore the Bourbon monarchy in France. The battle itself was a grueling and hard-fought contest, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties throughout the day. The French forces initially made some progress against the British and their allies, but the tide turned against Napoleon when the Prussian army arrived to reinforce the coalition forces. This timely intervention, combined with tactical mistakes made by Napoleon and his commanders, ultimately led to the French defeat. The impact of the Battle of Waterloo was felt far beyond the battlefield. With Napoleon's forces defeated and his ambitions for power dashed, he was forced to abdicate the throne for a second time, leading to his final exile on the remote island of St. Helena. The Bourbon monarchy was restored in France, with King Louis Exile returning to the throne. The aftermath of the battle saw significant changes in the political landscape of Europe. The Congress of Vienna, which had been convened to redraw the map of Europe following the Napoleonic Wars, established a new balance of power on the continent. The major powers agreed to a system of cooperation and mutual defence, known as the Concept of Europe, which aimed to prevent the rise of another dominant power like Napoleon's France. Waterloo also had a profound effect on the national identities and military traditions of the countries involved. In Britain, the victory was celebrated as a triumph of British resolve and determination, while in Prussia and other German states, it contributed to a growing sense of national unity and pride. The battle also marked the end of an era of large-scale, set-piece battles in European warfare as military tactics and technology evolved in the decades that followed. The Battle of Waterloo and its consequences remain a defining moment in European history. The defeat of Napoleon and the end of the Napoleonic Wars set the stage for a new era of diplomacy, cooperation, and relative peace in Europe. The battle's legacy endures not only in the political transformations it brought about, but also in the countless stories, legends, and artworks inspired by the dramatic events of that fateful day. Following his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo and his subsequent abdication, Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean. This final exile would mark the end of his tumultuous career and the beginning of a new, quieter phase of his life, spent in relative isolation and reflection. St. Helena, located more than 1,800 kilometers from the nearest landmass, was chosen as Napoleon's final place of exile due to its remoteness and the difficulty of escape. The British government, determined to prevent any further attempts by Napoleon to regain power, kept a close watch on the former emperor during his time on the island. Napoleon arrived at St. Helena in October 1815, and was settled in Longwood House, a modest residence with a small garden. The living conditions on the island were far from ideal, with a damp and windy climate and limited resources. However, despite these hardships and the constant surveillance by the British, Napoleon managed to maintain a semblance of dignity and composure throughout his exile. During his time on St. Helena, Napoleon occupied himself with various activities, including gardening, reading, and writing. He spent a significant amount of time reflecting on his life and career, discussing his experiences and thoughts with those around him. These conversations would later be recorded and published by his companions, providing valuable insight into Napoleon's thoughts and perspectives during his final years. One of the most significant projects undertaken by Napoleon during his exile was the writing of his memoirs. With the help of his companions and former generals, he began to chronicle his life and career, detailing his military campaigns, political accomplishments, and personal relationships. These memoirs, although incomplete at the time of his death, would later be published and serve as an important primary source for historians studying the Napoleonic era. Napoleon's health began to decline during his exile, with various ailments, including stomach issues and possibly cancer, taking a toll on his body. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, with the official cause of death recorded as stomach cancer. However, some theories suggest that he may have been poisoned, although this remains a subject of debate among historians. Napoleon's exile on St. Helena and his eventual death marked the end of a remarkable life and career that had shaped the course of European history. Although his empire had crumbled and his dreams of conquest had been thwarted, his legacy would endure long after his death. The political, military, and cultural changes he had initiated would continue to influence Europe and the world, ensuring that the story of Napoleon Bonaparte would remain a subject of fascination and study for generations to come. Napoleon Bonaparte's life and career had far-reaching consequences, not only for France, but for the world as a whole. His impact on history can be seen in various aspects of politics, military strategy, culture, and society, making him one of the most influential figures of his time. Political impact. One of the most significant political legacies of Napoleon was the introduction of the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal system that formed the basis of modern civil law in France and many other countries. The Code brought about key reforms in areas such as property rights, family law, and criminal law. It played a crucial role in replacing the outdated and inconsistent legal systems of the past, promoting the principles of equality before the law and the protection of individual rights. Military impact. Napoleon's military genius and innovative tactics revolutionized warfare during his time. He was known for his swift and decisive campaigns, as well as his ability to inspire and motivate his troops. His strategies, including the use of concentrated force, rapid movement, and effective communication, have had a lasting influence on military doctrine and the conduct of war. Spread of ideas. Napoleon's conquests and rule helped to spread the ideas of the French Revolution across Europe. Concepts such as nationalism, liberalism, and democracy gained traction in the territories he conquered, often leading to lasting political and social change. Although some of these changes were reversed after his fall, the seeds of revolution had been sown, and many European countries would eventually undergo significant transformations in the years that followed. Cultural impact. Napoleon's reign had a lasting impact on the arts and culture of Europe. He was a patron of the sciences, and his reign saw the establishment of institutions such as the Louvre Museum and the French Academy of Sciences. The Napoleonic era also witnessed the flourishing of neoclassical architecture and art, which drew inspiration from ancient Greece and Rome. Global repercussions. Napoleon's actions and the Napoleonic Wars had consequences beyond Europe. The conflicts disrupted global trade and led to the rise of British naval supremacy, which would shape the world for decades to come. In the Americas, the instability caused by the wars in Europe contributed to the independence movements of various colonies, eventually leading to the formation of new nations. Napoleon's impact on history is both far-reaching and complex. Although his rule was marked by war, conquest, and the collapse of his empire, the changes he initiated would have lasting effects on Europe and the world. Napoleon Bonaparte remains a subject of fascination and study for historians, as his life and legacy continue to influence our understanding of the past and the development of modern society.